The Stone Bearer by Barky Montgomery. Chapter 1, Discovery. Year 16, Year 17, Dog Moon Toy 2, 512, Age of Tears. As the afternoon waned, the Prince Warrior Gabriel found the way more difficult than he could have ever imagined. The dense foliage was hardy and ungiving, the ground at his feet precarious and rocky, strewn haphazardly with fragments of the huge gray-blue granite boulders that towered in great piles around him. Hidden under loose stones were pits and caves. Often Gabriel could hear water splashing deep in chasms far below, and hot, steamy geysers erupting, the sounds echoing up from unseen crevices at his weary feet. And as if this weren't enough, the rock flies were large and hungry and had decided that Gabriel was to be their lunch. His skin was covered with red welts from their painful bites. Using a green-stained machete, Gabriel slashed his way through a wall of sticky vines, white sap dripping from the hanging stumps like leaky faucets. He climbed to the near flat top of a blue granite boulder to evaluate his progress. To his relief, he had made it back to the rim of the great edge. He had come by a roundabout route, through a sliver of a cave, and he was pleased to now be able to map it satisfactorily. By standing on his toes, he could just see a marker he had left on the outermost edge of a jutting rock, 250 feet west and 50 feet below his present location. Using his compass as a guide, he roughly sketched the boundary of the cliff in a small black book. Then he matched it to another map he had brought with him, this one old, yellow, and rotted, nearly flaking into pieces even as he gently held it. The maps were close in their detail, not identical, but very, very close. He replaced them securely in a rain-proof knapsack, feeling very optimistic that he was now on the right course. He sighed as his mind strayed back to his home, Din Dayan, and to the events that were unfortunately unfolding there in his father's great castle city during his absence. The prearranged betrothal to a princess of a distant kingdom. Meetings, arrangements, plans, ceremonies, exchanges of money, land, and services, dowries, headaches. The last thing Gabriel wanted at this point in his life was marriage. However, his aging father, Isael the king, was adamant. He had heard that his fiancée, the Princess of Sicil, Amber Lee, was very beautiful, which was encouraging at least, taller than most, and as graceful as a wild antelope on the Eophian plains. He had been told that she was intelligent, clever in conversation, and politically astute, everything that he had been taught to find attractive in a potential partner. But, despite all the nudging and coaxing from his father and his counselors, Gabriel just wasn't prepared to take that harrowing road just yet. He had too many unrealized plans of his own. His father harped continuously that he would eventually sit on the throne of Persia and would need a wife to bear him an heir. Even though Gabriel was in the burgeoning young age of about 25, his father had been married at a much younger 19. "I'll get married as soon as I'm ready," he said aloud and then laughed at himself. "Talking to myself now, I do believe I've been out here too long." 27 days ago, he had stepped away from the last outpost of rural civilization to map this insect and snake-infested jungle, leaving his small skycraft Horizon behind, hidden in a secluded spot on a wooded plateau near a small jungle town called Gay Rouge. He chose this particular corner of the great rock Galoth, not just to explore and map, but to test an intriguing theory of his. According to the deteriorating map he had found stuck between the pages of a Persian civil's 1,000-year-old wine Bible a few months previous, he was possibly getting very close to an ancient Mahekian city, all but lost to man's written history. It was known as Swaria Talu, City of the Sky. He had never seen it rumored on any other map, nor had any lore master he questioned have any knowledge of the place, other than vague references in remote children's fables. So far, after 27 fly-ridden days and an equal number of mosquito-infested nights, he had not come across a single clue regarding Swaria Talu, not a bit of road, or wall or crumbled foundation. Not even a blessed patch of level ground to stand upon. Nevertheless, still faithful, he trusted that his calculations were accurate, so he persevered, feeling more than ever that he was drawing very close to something now. Few more days were all he needed to find the Mystic City ruins or to prove that it did not exist there after all. He paused to drink from his water pouch. The lemon and herb drink was tart, cool, and refreshing on his dry palate. Behind him, the forest loomed. Huge, twisted, gray-barked trees, their broad green leaves waving like fans in the breeze. Long, hairy vines looped from the heights, knotting the trees together like giant spiders' webs. Steamy geysers erupted somewhere in the distance with a wet whistle, a constant reminder of the geographical oddity that had created the great rock Galoth, and the year-round temperate climate across its southern and central regions. A myriad of animal noises filled the air, birds and insects mostly, but sometimes Gabriel detected a larger, more sinister throat among the din. He turned his back to the wall of trees and looked out before him. Where he stood on the southern cliff top of Galoth, the ground fell away at his feet, straight down for as far as could be seen, more than 4,000 feet at certain points. Several small streams ran out from between the giant tree roots nearby, falling over the precipice and into the misty depths below. From Gabriel's viewpoint, the vista was breathtaking. Sunlit clouds swirled far below, but sometimes the clouds would break, and he could see patches of earth, a twisting green river, or some glistening body of distant water. The wind rose in cool drafts, tossing his dark wavy hair and ruffling his loose-fitting shirt. Standing on this cliff top, looking out over rugged Galgaraya, Gabriel felt an exhilarating urge to leap off of the stone and fly like an eagle, the wind strong beneath his wishful wings. With a sigh, he tightened his pack and followed the crumbling rocks down the cliff edge, hacking steadily as he went. Past a thin ridge, the trail led across a natural granite bridge formed by one long, narrow boulder, perhaps 50 feet in length, 5 to 10 feet in breadth, lying precariously across a crevice hundreds of feet deep. Geysers sprayed clouds of boiling steam into the eddy far below. On the other side, he found the undergrowth impervious. He hacked at it until he thought his notched machete was going to break. Around him, the jungle seemed so still that it was nearly anticipatory. There were many dangerous creatures always lurking nearby, he knew, so he was always wary. His mind went to a young lady he had met in Des Rouges just days before he had left on this exploration. Her name had been Ophelia. Quite an astonishing creature, this gypsy girl had not the accustomed modesty or restraint Gabriel was used to from his usual female courtiers. She had raven hair and eyes like chips of topaz and emeralds reflecting somber moonlight. He had met her on the street, at a fair, selling ribbons and fancy fabrics, and had been instantly taken with her sensuality and striking beauty. They spoke for a while, and she agreed to meet him later at a place they both knew, a tavern in the seedy part of town called the Has-Been Inn. Gabriel went on his way to finish up business he had, but as night came, his mind dwelled continually on Ophelia, so he left early for the rendezvous, hoping to have a drink or two by himself before she arrived. He was always more sociable and relaxed around the opposite sex after a good stiff belt. Ophelia had shown up right on time. She wore a flowing coral and white sundress with mint green ribbons. Her dark hair with its red highlights, tied up in the marketplace earlier that afternoon, was loose then, flowing down to her hips in shadowy waves, adorned with tiny coral bows and white ribbons. They drank wine together and laughed until the wee hours of the morning. Gabriel could not remember having a more delightful time. She was a wonderful conversationalist, able to drag him into all topics of debate and discussion. Of course, wine was a notorious tongue loosener. He told her his name, but he never told her who or what he was. Gabriel had found that people often treated him quite differently when they knew his social status, and he did not want that with Ophelia. things had been going too well between them to chance it. This was one of those occasions when he treasured rare anonymity. The rest of the night was a blur. Fleeting glimpses of faces, movement and color, and cold laughter, distant and condescending. A sleep so deep that he was unable to dream. The next morning, Gabriel woke on the carpenter's doorstep. He did not remember how he had gotten there, and he had no idea where he was. It wasn't until he felt his empty pockets and he realized what had happened. A bit of something in his drink had put him to sleep, and now this gypsy girl had Gabriel's purse and all the gold coin he had in it, more than an angry carpenter who kicked Gabriel off his stoop with a swift boot made in over a year. He had been taken by a female again. When would he ever learn his lesson? They were scheming, conniving villains, the lot of them. All inquiries concerning Ophelia's whereabouts came up fruitless, as he knew they would. One thing was certain: he would never judge anyone at first glance again, particularly a woman. In his experience, people were never what they seemed. Selfish, scheming, manipulative wench. Another reason I should not be contemplating marriage. Women. Chapter 2. Enough daydreaming, he told himself. He struggled through the dense brush, squeezing through as he ascended. As he noisily emerged from the crevice, hair covered with mud and wet leaves, he heard a sudden noise in the trees nearby. A rowdy flutter. Gabriel froze, alert and listening. Directly ahead of him, to the northeast, some startled birds had taken suddenly to the air. Gabriel waited and watched as a colorful jungle fowl circled and landed in the nearby branches overhead. Their cries were anxious and wary, as if something was hunting nearby. He remembered waking that same morning to a strange sound, something mechanical, he had thought at the time, roaring and whirring from far off. That was all he could recall after he was fully awake, a whirring sound like a skycraft's failing turbine. Now, he wondered if that noise had anything to do with the startled birds in the trees above him, still squawking chaotically. He knew that there were no coincidences in the jungle. Unfortunately, his path continued in that very direction, so, keeping a cautious eye and ear, Gabriel moved onward, chopping at a particularly stout vine that was barring his way, severing it completely. After a short while, Gabriel came to a standstill. Near the spot where he estimated the birds had been startled, he came to a sheer wall of rock. It faced the open south with no trail to either side. He could not head back in hope of circling around, because this had been the only route through. He searched the wall for any possible handholds to help him climb, but the rock was so smooth that it almost seemed unnatural. He began unstrapping his climbing claws. It was then that he noticed something that he hadn't noticed before. He held his breath, quickly backing away to get a better look. There was some kind of immense carving on the face of the rock. Excitedly, Gabriel stepped back as far as he was able, craning his neck back to see. There was a series of letters, great 30-foot letters, carved into the granite, facing the southern sky like an immense welcome sign. They were strange, unknown characters of Mahekian descent, mostly covered with a blanket of clinging ivy. Gabriel was elated. Civilization, ancient and forgotten. He had found it. It must be, he said. This had to be Swaria Talu. He pulled some rotten foliage away from the stone face and discovered a fissure 10 feet from the ground. Using a dead limb as a makeshift ladder, Gabriel pulled himself up into the narrow, jagged crack. It was tight, but widened slightly just above his head. Far above, the cloudless blue sky yawned past the lips of the fissure. Bracing with his legs on either side, he slowly hoisted his way up, first with his legs, then with his arms, over and over. About a half hour of struggling, thusly, he reached the top and emerged into a large open glade. It was here that he made 2 remarkable discoveries. The first was an ancient stairwell at the far end of the glade, cut into the natural granite, leading up into the hillside trees. The intricate carvings on the posts and the arches were definitely ancient Mahekian. Excitedly, Gabriel stepped through the underbrush, pulling debris from his way as he followed the stairs skyward with his eyes. They led up the hillside into an ancient stone temple, half hidden by the forest rot and years of untended foliage. All the ancient Mahekian cities were bordered with temples, which were the gateways to their mystical interiors. Inside the walls, no doubt, were treasures and answers to mysteries, ancient books and scrolls, magic, weapons, potions, medicines, secrets, and much more. This was the beginning of a great spiritual and intellectual adventure. Gabriel felt it in his blood and bones. All great rangers were known for their discoveries. Fabel for the Garzad Tower, Imstre Greer for Eagle Sphere, the circular road of the winds, Mein Jabderfleur for the lost underwater city of the Altan Terrace. Now Gabriel would be credited for the discovery of the lost city of Swaria Talu, and just as important, he would make his aging father, Isael Din Dayan, the king of Persia, very proud of him. Perhaps, he could only hope, this significant discovery would help postpone the wedding to Princess Amber yet another year. Politics be damned. His heart leaped and he cried out, his voice echoing boldly off the cliffs. He had been searching for this lost city for nearly a year. And then it was at this point that Gabriel made his second astonishing discovery. He paused in the middle of his victory dance as soon as he noticed it. Beyond the stairwell, and to the right, he detected something much more subtle. A less trained eye might have missed it altogether. There was but the slightest anomaly in the forest. A small tree had been recently severed at the height of about 30 feet. And further into the forest, several more were sheared and broken, as though something from out of the skies had torn through the trees at a terrific speed, slicing through the middle terraces as it crashed to the earth. He climbed up on a tall wall to get a better look, following the probable path of the falling object. He detected nothing at first, and then, between the huge waxy leaves, he spotted a glimpse of red and white. Uncommon colors for the Galothian forest floor, red and white on a smooth wooden surface. His brow tightened. He was quite sure that it was a hull of a crashed skycraft. It must have been this crashing skycraft that had made the sound, the whir, that had aroused him from his sleep that very morning. Someone might still be inside, he was thinking. Someone could be alive, and possibly hurt. He glanced at the temple as he scrambled over the rocks toward the skycraft crash. More than anything, he wanted to rush up the stairs and find a way through the gates of Swaria Talu, but the ruins of the city of the sky would have to wait. It had been there for thousands of years and would be there for many years to come, so a few more minutes would not matter. As Gabriel neared the wreckage, he determined that the crash was indeed recent, as he had assumed, within hours. The skycraft was dirty and disgusting, a Persian make, once very elegant but modified for fighting, a two-man sabotage vehicle used primarily by rogue thieves and skyro-pirates. He assumed that it was probably stolen. There were no identifiable markings on it, or if there had been, they had been scoured off or painted over. It was overturned, its contents scattered in the bush around it. There was no sound now, not even the hissing of turbines, which meant that there was a good probability that it had run out of fuel, forcing it to fall from the sky. It was splintered into several pieces, but for the most part, the tear-shaped main cabin was intact. Gabriel decided to initiate his investigation there. He circled at a safe distance, staying low behind the mossy trees, pausing to watch for movement and to listen for noises. He could see that there was no one in the upper cabin, alive or dead. Except for debris and scattered garbage, it was empty. If there were survivors somewhere out in the jungle, Gabriel pitied them, particularly if they were injured in any way. This was not a safe place, especially at night. Stealthily, Gabriel advanced upon the broken hull. The thought of an ambush crossed his mind, or traps. So did the thought of repairing this wreck, finding some fuel close by, and going back after his own, more reliable skycraft Horizon near Des Rouges. Cautiously, he knelt to look underneath, and what he saw made him gasp. The pilot's chair had come unfastened from the hull and was sitting upright in the rocks and vines. Beneath the skycraft, a large, magnificently colored jungle snake was coiled around someone still trapped in the pilot's chair. Its coiled muscles tightened in rippling knots. The reptile's jaw was unhinged, encircling its mouth around its victim's entire head up to the neck. From between its sinewy coils, Gabriel spotted a hand, a small human hand, grasping weakly yet desperately at the muscled body of the snake. The hand quivered weakly, then went limp. Gabriel did not waste a second. He seized the snake by the tail and attacked it with his machete. Blood sprayed. The snake, unable to finish its meal, badly wounded and unwilling to fight, finally relinquished its hold on its victim, a young boy, and slithered quickly and desperately into the rocks beneath the ship. Working quickly, Gabriel dropped the machete, released the boy from the chair, and laid him on the ground in soft ferns. He propped the boy's head up and checked for breath. It was there, faint and sour, having the smell of sickness on it. "Hey there," he called, checking the boy's eyes, which rolled up sleepily under the lids. "Can you hear me, boy? Hey!" The boy stirred and took a weak swing at Gabriel's face. The blow fell painlessly against his cheek. Then the arm dropped listless. The boy was gaunt, malnourished, and he burned with fever. His skin was covered with red, blistering blotches, some rising to infected points. There appeared to be no broken bones, but there were cuts and scrapes and patches of blood on his hands, in his hair, but mostly on his left leg. Gabriel gingerly peeled back the torn pants of the boy's left calf. There, he discovered the main cause of injury, a vicious infected wound. The leg had been lacerated with a sharp object, deep and razor thin. It had been jabbed quickly, such as with a knife. The skin around the wound had peeled back and blistered as if retreating from acidic poison. It was days old, but it was not healing. A thin trail of dark blood ran from it, mixed with the yellowish-white flow of infection. The skin around the wound was green, the bruises gray and deep into the muscle, from the knee to the ankle. The veins around the wound were bulging as though they were about to burst. When Gabriel laid a finger on the sore leg and the boy moaned and twisted, Gabriel frowned. The situation was very bad. If he did not die, it was Gabriel's opinion that the boy would eventually lose his leg. "Listen to me. Be still. I'm going to try to help you," Gabriel said. "Drink this." He tilted the boy's head back and trickled some water into his mouth. He expected the boy to choke, but he did not, so Gabriel gave him more. He took out some medicinal herbs from a thin pouch on his belt and stuck them between the boy's cheek and gums. Fortunately, Gabriel still had a small vial of an ointment called Bacrad that he had obtained from a physician savant in Derouge, and he mixed the rest of the herbs into it, then placed the glob into a strip of clean dry cloth from his pack. He carefully placed it directly onto the wound. As soon as the cold, oily ointment touched the leg, the boy stiffened and cried out. Gabriel worked firmly and diligently. He wrapped the strip around the bruised leg several times and tied it loosely, squeezing the ointment against the sore. The boy, fading in and out of consciousness, kicked and grabbed at the dressing, trying to free himself of it. "Stop that," Gabriel said softly, holding the boy's hands at the wrist. "Just relax. Rest if you can." He deduced conclusively that the boy had been poisoned with an assassin's blade. He did not know how potent the poison had been, but the dosage seemed deadly enough, although it was inflicted with the cruel intention of making him suffer a few days first before dying. It had all the qualities of a torture poison. Reluctantly, Gabriel removed another vial from his pack. It was a generic anti-venom that he always carried, one that worked well enough against most known nerve and bloodstream poisons if given timely. But if Gabriel was wrong and the boy was not poisoned, the anti-venom would kill him instead. Gabriel saw no other choice. He squeezed the boy's mouth open, flicked the lid off of the vial with his thumb. He upturned it, and several clear drops fell into the boy's mouth. The boy's face tightened repulsively. He tried to expel the bitter liquid with his tongue, but it had already been absorbed into his saliva. "There you go," Gabriel said, leaning back against the Skycraft hull, for that was all he could do for the moment. Just sit back, watch, and wait. Under the circumstances, his resources were very limited. Despite the dirt and blood, Gabriel saw that the boy had the look of some aristocracy to him, and that he was not properly dressed for travel. His tailor-made clothes had at one time been fine and expensive. His boots were crafted as fine as Gabriel had ever seen, and he had 2 small gold hoops hanging from both of his ears. His blond hair and nails were well groomed, but his face was red and sun-blistered. His hands were thin and elegant, like a pianist's. He had certainly never seen hard physical labor before. The boy's eyes fluttered open, and their eyes briefly met for the first time. It appeared as if the boy, despite his injuries and sickness, snarled defiantly at Gabriel. Suddenly the boy began retching. "Well, that's a good sign," Gabriel said, turning him to the side. "Maybe he'll live after all." 3. The afternoon passed slowly. A sudden rain came, drenching everything. Then, as quickly as it had arrived, it was gone again. The air about them grew thick and steamy, and the damn flies returned with a vengeance. Gabriel crawled out from underneath the overturned Skycraft. The air was stifling. He continued his search of the area until he was sure that there had been no other passengers aboard. He covered the ground and brushed meticulously and found no tracks that led to or from the crash. The boy had been traveling alone. Bizarre, to say the least. The boy's delirious moaning continued. Gabriel frowned. There were no cities or towns within several days of travel, and this boy needed immediate medical treatment. Gabriel did not like the prospect of amputating the boy's leg himself should it get worse, but that was a decision that would soon need to be made. Something else was dreadfully wrong here, too. Something on a broader scale. The boy was certainly no ranger or assassin, although he was traveling alone in the wilds, piloting an assassin's Skycraft, and he had been stabbed in the leg by an assassin's poison blade to torture him or to make him talk. If this were so, where was the assassin? If the boy had somehow escaped and stolen the assassin's Skycraft, then the assassin's work with this boy remained unfinished. The boy was still alive and obviously fleeing. Not good, Gabriel mumbled to himself, and he caught himself checking his weapons. He wished that he had brought more. Again the boy moaned deliriously. His dry heaves continued. Gabriel shook his head and cursed aloud. "Looks like I've got my work cut out for me then," he said. He knew that he was going to have to carry this boy back to civilization on his back across horrible terrain, while eluding any pursuers, possibly professional hunters and killers. Maybe there was just one, maybe there were many. This was not going to be an easy task. He breathed deeply through his nose and let out an angry snort. There was little doubt that the only reason he was taking this boy back to civilization was to give him a proper burial. How would he get up into the trees at night? What would they eat? There was not enough food for one in his pack, let alone two, the second one needing constant and crucial nourishment just to stay alive. Gabriel felt weary and frustrated and selfishly disappointed. The temple, he thought, so damn close. Fine then. One step at a time, he said sternly to himself, looking up at the westering suns. He noted that there was a stream close by where he could dip the boy, clothes and all, until his fever broke. That was as good a start as any. He could lighten the load, pack only the essentials. Nature would provide. Then he would carry the boy back to Des Rouges for a doctor. It wasn't that far, he thought. He lifted the boy up in his arms and carried him toward the clearing. "Let's get going then," he said. Gabriel never saw the temples of Soria Talu, City of the Sky, again. It's chapter 1. Chapter 2 is Assassins. We'll get that tomorrow. Hope you liked it.